Welcome to Starbound. My name's Aram, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Freyrin and Remike. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The Galactic Council chamber stretched like a cathedral built for gods with anger management issues. Large pillars twisted toward a ceiling that showed real-time star maps, while representatives from different species sat in judgment. The air felt thick and heated with tension. At the center of it all, in a chair that wasn't quite restraining him, sat Ace Mercer. He looked unimpressive for someone who'd supposedly brought the galaxy's most powerful coalition to its knees. Average height, graying temples, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for tea service. The only remarkable thing about him was his absolute stillness, the kind of calm that made predators nervous because they couldn't tell if he was prey or apex. Ace Mercer was the most powerful and lethal interrogator that had worked for the Council for years. If there were warlords that needed cracking, Ace could be counted on to get the information needed from them.
"Interrogator Mercer?"
hissed Supreme Counselor Thiara, her Elari head tentacles writhing with barely contained psionic energy.
"You stand accused of the systematic theft of classified data from 17 member worlds, the exposure of state secrets that have destabilized 3 governments, and—"
"I'm sitting, actually." Ace's voice was soft, conversational, like he was correcting a waiter about his order. The Faraxi security captain's claws extended with audible clicks.
"You think this is amusing, human?"
"I think accuracy matters, Captain Exmuth. In my profession, precision of language often determines who walks away and who doesn't." A ripple of unease swept through the chamber. Here was the thing about Ace Mercer that made him legendary. He was capable of breaking warlords without laying a finger on them. He'd extracted confessions from beings who didn't even have consciences, and he'd done it all with words as well as devices. He knew exactly when to use the right words in the right order at precisely the right moment. You'd be lucky if he decided to use a device instead.
"The evidence is overwhelming,"
rumbled Counselor Grex, his rock-like Varn features grinding as he spoke.
"Military secrets leaked from the Nexus offense, personal communications between heads of state, security protocols that should have been impossible to access."
Each word dropped like a boulder into still water.
"All of it leaked within hours of your surrender."
Surrender? Ace tasted the word like fine wine. Is that what we're calling it? The Asenthal delegates whispered among themselves in harmonics that sounded like wind chimes having anxiety attacks. Their species communicated in frequency layers, but even humans could hear the fear threaded through their song.
"You will tell us,"
Thiara continued, her mental voice scraping against the inside of everyone's skull.
"How you penetrated our security, who helped you, what species you represent, why Earth, a backwater world that barely achieved faster-than-light travel, produced something like you."
Ace looked up for the first time since entering the chamber. His eyes were gray, unremarkable except for their complete lack of fear. When he smiled, it was the kind of expression that made predators remember they were also prey. "You want to know what I represent?" He leaned forward slightly, just enough to make 47 species collectively hold their breath. "I represent reflection." His voice carried no threat, no anger, no emotion at all. It was simply true. You didn't build this council on unity. You built it on secrets. Every empire needs a dead man's switch, and yours just got bumped. He paused, letting that sink in. But my actions were always merely a reflection of your own. So ask yourselves, did you represent your people fairly? Did you hire my services for justice or for power? The chamber fell into the kind of silence that precedes avalanches. If you hired me for good, I reflect your light back with clarity. If you hired me for cruelty, another pause, another smile. I still reflect, but it'll be your own shadows staring back, and I won't flinch. His eyes swept across the assembled delegates, meeting each gaze with terrifying equanimity. But you might. Counselor Yelani of the Elari delegation made a sound like air escaping a punctured lung and toppled from her seat. Her tentacles convulsed as her mind tried to process implications that felt like cognitive dynamite. Captain X. Muth, the Varaxi security chief, moved with liquid efficiency to seal the chamber doors. His predator's instincts were screaming that something had just shifted in the food chain. The Ascenthal harmony fractured into discordant panic songs as they realized their frequency-based communications might have been monitored for years. And Counselor Grex, solid, dependable Grex, who'd held the coalition together through 3 wars, quietly activated his emergency beacon and ordered a complete planetary lockdown of the Varn homeworld. Within minutes, the most powerful governing body in the galaxy was turning on itself. Ace leaned back in his chair and said nothing at all. Paranoia is contagious, and the Galactic Council had just been exposed to patient zero. Within 6 hours of Ace's speech, the first classified document appeared on the Interstellar infosphere. Detailed schematics for the Elari's Project Mindbridge, an illegal psionic weapon designed to lobotomize entire populations. The timestamp showed it had been approved by the same Counselor Thiara who'd been demanding answers from Ace. Within 12 hours, someone leaked the Varaxi military's Operation Bloodfang, a plan to use their security access to assassinate inconvenient political rivals. Captain Exmut's personal authorization was right there in digital black and white. By the end of the first day, compromising footage of 3 different species leaders had made its way into public broadcasts across 17 systems. And here was the truly terrifying part. Every single leak came after someone had visited Ace Mercer. He sat in his detention cell, which wasn't really a cell so much as a comfortable room with walls that happened to be very difficult to leave, and said absolutely nothing. The same knowing smile played at the corners of his mouth, as if he was enjoying a private joke that the rest of the universe hadn't gotten yet. Counselor Thiara arrived for the first interrogation with 3 of her most powerful psionic interrogators. The Elari were mind readers by nature, their head tentacles bristling with neural interfaces that could tear secrets from unwilling brains like pulling teeth from a corpse.
"We will have our answers, human,"
Thiara announced, her mental voice scraping against everyone's consciousness like fingernails on glass. Ace looked up from the book he was reading, something called The Art of Conversation that he'd somehow acquired. That smile never wavered. The first interrogator, a young Elari named Tani, approached with the confidence of someone who never met a mind she couldn't crack. Her tentacles writhed around Ace's skull, glowing with psionic energy that made the air itself hum. The moment she made contact, Tani began screaming. Not out loud. Her throat had seized from shock, but her mental shriek tore through the chamber like a psychic fire alarm, causing the other Elari to clutch their heads in sympathetic agony. She collapsed, convulsing as blood poured from her eyes.
What did you do?
Theara demanded. Ace turned a page, silent. The second interrogator, Cole Mesh, tried a different approach. Instead of diving deep, he skimmed the surface, looking for surface thoughts, recent memories. He lasted 7 seconds before his head tentacles began smoking and he started speaking in languages that hurt to hear. The third interrogator never even got close. He took one look at Ace's patient, knowing expression and fled the chamber. Ace shook his head in disappointment. If they were going to interrogate him, the least they could do was make it more interesting than his book. By evening, Tani was catatonic. Cole Mesh was speaking only in mathematical equations that described the geometry of suffering, and classified Alari military protocols were being broadcast across the infosphere with timestamps that showed they'd been leaked precisely when Tani made psionic contact. Theara stared at the human through the observation window, watching him read peacefully while her people's deepest secrets burned across the galaxy.
Monster,
she whispered. Ace looked up, as if he'd heard her through soundproof walls. He smiled and touched 2 fingers to his temple in a small salute. Captain Exmouth had a different philosophy about interrogation. Where the Alari used finesse, the Firaxi used brutality. If you couldn't extract information through subtlety, you beat it out of them until something gave way. He brought Scar Thak to do the work, a Firaxi berserker who'd killed 17 sentients with his bare claws before getting captured. The plan was beautifully simple. Let Scar Thak loose on the human until he started talking. They sealed Ace in a reinforced chamber with the killer and waited. Through the monitoring screens, they watched Scar Thak circle Ace like a predator. The human sat calmly at a small table, hands folded, wearing that same infuriating smile.
You know what I am, human.
Scar Thak's voice was a gravelly roar that had been the last sound his victims heard. Ace merely chuckled. Scar Thak lunged. His claws, razor-sharp talons that could shred steel, raked across Ace's chest, opening 4 parallel wounds that immediately began bleeding through his shirt. Ace didn't flinch, didn't cry out. His smile never wavered. Scar Thak snarled and backhanded him across the face. The blow would have shattered a human skull. Ace's head snapped to the side, and when he turned back, there was blood trickling from his split lip. His smile had grown wider. Scar Thak snarled.
My first kill fought harder than this. At least have the honor to stand up for yourself and tell us what you know.
Ace smiled knowingly. Scar Thak shook him.
All you do is run away, don't you? Run away from your problems like a weak, sniveling little brat.
Scar Thak bared his fangs and got in Ace's face, close enough to see his own reflection.
Yes, that's what you do. Run away like your mother used to say, like your father did. You find pleasure in scaring the weak, don't you? You twisted monster.
Scar Thak grabbed Ace's throat and squeezed. Anything to make that smile falter. But Ace kept on smiling.
I bet you think you're so tough when you scare us all, so special. You like killing others for a living, don't you? Hurting them. Probably because you were the weakest among your siblings, and started killing and torturing because it made you feel powerful.
The killer's grip tightened. Ace's breathing became labored, but he kept smiling. Scar Thak's claws dug deeper. Blood ran down Ace's neck in thin streams. Scar Thak went on.
But it didn't last, did it? A feeling, because deep down you knew the truth.
Ace's smile was beatific now, despite the pain.
You weren't strong. You were just afraid.
Scarthok hesitated as he saw himself reflected in Ace's eyes. The berserker released Ace's throat and staggered backward, staring at his bloody claws as if seeing them for the first time. His breathing became rapid, shallow, the panting of a panicked animal. Scarthok collapsed in the corner, curling into a fetal position and making sounds that no apex predator should ever make. When the guards finally entered the chamber, they found him rocking back and forth, whimpering.
My mother used to say that all I did was run away. I suppose she was right.
Ace was still sitting at his table, bleeding but unbroken, smiling cruelly at the berserker. "Interesting session," he told Captain Exmouth when the Firaxi security chief arrived. "Very enlightening." By morning, Scarthok was in a psychiatric facility, and detailed records of Firaxi Black Ops assassinations were flooding the public networks. Each file was tagged with a timestamp showing exactly when Scarthok had first laid claws on Ace. Captain Exmouth stared at the human through the observation window, watching him turn pages with hands that should have been shaking from trauma. That smile never left his damned face. The Synthal were a species that communicated in harmonic frequencies, their crystalline bodies resonating with sounds that could shatter glass or soothe savage beasts. They approached interrogation like musicians approaching a symphony, with precision, artistry, and an understanding that the right note at the right moment could break anything. They brought their memory echo chamber, a device that could extract and replay memories with perfect clarity. They'd get the information they needed from Ace one way or another. No need for invasive mind reading or physical torture. Just sit the subject inside, activate the resonance field, and watch their secrets play out on the chamber walls like a holographic movie.
"The human consciousness is just another instrument,"
explained Senior Resonator Thisara as they sealed Ace inside the chamber.
"We simply need to find the right frequency to make it sing."
Through the transparent walls, they could see Ace sitting motionless in the center of the chamber, hands folded in his lap, wearing that infuriating smile. The chamber's walls began to glow as harmonic frequencies washed over him in waves designed to strip away mental defenses. For the first minute, nothing happened. For the second minute, still nothing. By the third minute, the Synthal operators were adjusting frequencies, wondering if human brains worked differently than expected. In the fourth minute, a grainy, glitchy memory started to appear on the holographic display. The chamber's resonance suddenly spiked. Warning lights flashed as harmonic frequencies went wild, creating sounds that made the Synthal observers clutch their crystalline heads in pain. The memory showed a little girl, no older than 12. It then showed a warlord who appeared to be her father. The warlord seemed proud of his daughter, but also overconfident of his reputation. Ace took advantage of that. The memory shifted to Ace and the little girl sitting in her bedroom. He sat in a chair with a child's book in his hands, appearing to have been reading to her. She sat on the floor with stuffed animals, appearing to have been acting out the story he read with her stuffed animals. After he finished reading to her, he set the book down and began telling her a different sort of story. For hours, he told her exactly what her father had done to other people's children. Every detail, every scream, every last breath. The chamber's walls began to crack as Ace himself envisioned all the violent and cruel things he had witnessed the warlord do to those he sought to conquer. By the end of Ace's story, the little girl begged him to stop. He had never hurt the girl. simply told her what she'd be inheriting as she grew up, the legacy her father was leaving behind, what she would become if she didn't choose differently. Ace knew the little girl was strong enough to handle the responsibility, because if she didn't, he'd be back. Hairline fractures spread across the crystalline surface like a spider web. She chose differently. Her father didn't survive the conversation he and Ace had afterward. The memory echo chamber exploded. When the smoke cleared, Ace was sitting calmly in the center of the wreckage, still wearing that knowing smile.
Technical malfunction,
someone said with a strained voice. Senior Resonator Thesaurus stared at the ruins of their most sophisticated interrogation device.
What are you?
Ace stood, straightening his shirt with the casual demeanor of someone getting ready for his next appointment. He just shrugged and smirked. Thesaurus saw herself reflected in his dark eyes, and he saw himself reflected in hers. Human. Within hours, classified Yasin-Thal communications were appearing on public networks, recordings of their leadership discussing the acceptable losses in their mining operations, where they'd been using slave labor from primitive species. The timestamp on every leak corresponded exactly to the moment the memory echo chamber had made contact with Ace's consciousness. The Varn were a species that believed in straightforward solutions. They were living rock, essentially immortal, and had about as much patience for subtlety as an avalanche has for detours. Counselor Grex himself came to handle Ace's interrogation, bringing with him a device that looked like it belonged in a medieval torture chamber.
The Neural Ripper,
Grex explained in his grinding voice, each word sounding like boulders colliding.
It doesn't read minds. It simply removes the parts of your brain that let you lie. Permanently.
Ace looked up from his new book, Understanding Motivation, a Practical Guide, and smiled. The Neural Ripper consisted of probes that would burrow directly into a subject's skull, locating and burning out the neural pathways associated with deception. It was agonizing, irreversible, and supposedly foolproof. They strapped Ace to a chair designed for beings twice his size, his human frame looking almost childlike against the stone restraints. The Neural Ripper descended toward his skull, its probes glowing white-hot. Ace never stopped smiling. The first probe pierced his scalp with a sizzling sound. Blood ran down his forehead, but his expression remained serene, almost blissful. Ace looked curious as the probe buried itself deeper in his flesh. He'd always wondered what it would feel like to have someone else rummaging around in his head. It sort of tickled, once you got used to the pain. The second probe found neural tissue. Ace's body convulsed as electricity coursed through his brain, but somehow he remained calm and almost cheery. He seemed to genuinely want to know if this device would work or not. His breath was strained now, coming in short gasps, but that smile never wavered. Grex's rocky features shifted in what might have been confusion.
The procedure should have rendered you incapable of staying silent by now.
Another probe pierced deeper. Ace's back arched against the restraints, and when he spoke again, there was blood frothing at the corners of his mouth.
Sir, we can't push this too far or we'll— Silence!
Grex snapped, glaring at Ace.
He will break one way or another. He has to.
The Neural Ripper's reading spiked. According to the instruments, it was successfully mapping and destroying the neural pathways associated with deception. But sir, pain is just another form of communication. He's communicating, but not with words. If we continue for too long, we'll kill him. and we can't let him die with what he knows." Grex shrieked with frustration. "The problem with trying to remove someone's ability to lie is that you have to understand what truth actually is first," Grex's assistant whispered. Warning lights began flashing on the Neural Ripper's control panel. And the truth was, Counselor Grex wasn't interrogating Ace to get information. He was doing it because he was terrified of what Ace might say if he didn't keep screaming. Except Grex couldn't even crack Ace enough to make him scream, let alone utter a single word. Nothing but that repulsive, unsettling smile. Sparks erupted from the machine's processors. The Neural Ripper began smoking. The truth was that Grex and his entire species spent 3,000 years pretending to be wise and patient and eternal, when really they were just scared little rocks. And Grex knew that Ace knew it. The machine exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. When the smoke cleared, Ace was still strapped to the chair, still bleeding from multiple head wounds, still wearing that serene, knowing smile. The Neural Ripper lay in twisted ruins around him, its probes shattered. Counselor Grex stared at the wreckage, his stone features grinding with what might have been emotion. He somehow found himself trembling. Ace met his gaze with those gray eyes that seemed to see through rock and time and all the comfortable lies that immortal beings told themselves. Grex looked in Ace's eyes and knew that this was what happened when someone who can change meets someone who refuses to. By evening, geological surveys revealing the Varn's secret strip mining operations on 17 uninhabited worlds were spreading across the galactic networks. The timestamp on every leak corresponded exactly to the moment the Neural Ripper had first made contact with Ace's brain tissue. And Counselor Grex, for the first time in 3,000 years, experienced something his species had thought themselves incapable of: doubt. The Galactic Council was at war with itself. Not the clean, civilized kind of war with rules and protocols, the messy, paranoid, everyone against everyone kind that burned civilizations from the inside out. And through it all, the leaks continued. Military secrets, personal blackmail, cultural taboos that some species had killed to keep hidden. Each revelation perfectly timed, perfectly targeted, perfectly designed to make everyone suspect everyone else. But the most terrifying part wasn't the leaks themselves. It was Ace Mercer, sitting in his comfortable cell, bleeding from a half-dozen failed interrogations, reading his books and wearing that same knowing smile. Never complaining, never threatening, never even raising his voice. Just reflecting. And in that reflection, the most powerful beings in the galaxy saw themselves clearly for the first time in centuries. They didn't like what they saw. But Kaiko, senior investigator for the Telnari Diplomatic Corps, was having doubts. She was what humans might call hard-boiled if they knew that Telnari were basically sentient crystals with trust issues and a talent for uncovering lies. While the rest of the council descended into chaos, she did what she did best. She investigated. What she found made her want to drink something stronger than Telnari mineral water. The leaks weren't coming from Ace's detention facility. They weren't even coming from the council station. They were originating from dozens of different systems across the galaxy, all perfectly coordinated, all using administrative access that predated Ace's arrival by years. Someone had been planning this for a very long time. The really unsettling part? Every single system that had been compromised shared one tiny detail in their bureaucratic records: a human administrator embedded somewhere in the chain of command. IT support, filing clerks, maintenance schedulers. invisible people doing invisible jobs. And every single one of those humans had vanished without a trace exactly 17 minutes after Ace delivered his speech. Not dead, not transferred, not retired. Simply gone. Like they'd never existed at all, except for the digital footprints they'd left behind in 47 different government systems. Kaiko stared at her findings, her crystalline structure flickering with the rapid color changes that indicated deep thought among her people.
"By the eternal lattice," she whispered. "He's not the leak. He's the detonator."
The revelation hit Kaiko like a meteor made of pure understanding. This wasn't about Ace Mercer being some superhuman infiltrator. This was about humans being exactly what they'd always been. Patient, methodical, and absolutely terrifying when they decided to care about something. She compiled her report while the council tore itself apart around her. Wars were being declared in the hallways. The Firaxi had barricaded themselves in the eastern wing. The Elari were broadcasting threats that made reality bend at the edges, and somewhere in the chaos, Ace Mercer sat reading his book, occasionally turning pages. Her investigation revealed the scope of it. Hundreds of humans, maybe thousands, placed throughout the galactic government over the course of decades. Not spies in any traditional sense. They'd done their jobs perfectly, earned commendations, made friends. They'd been invisible not because they were sneaky, but because they were genuinely good at what they did. But buried in their personnel files, in the employment histories that nobody ever bothered to read, was a pattern. Every single one had been recommended by someone who'd been recommended by someone who eventually traced back to a small consulting firm on Earth called Meridian Solutions. Meridian Solutions, which had exactly one employee listed in its corporate records: A. Mercer. The beauty of it was breathtaking in its simplicity. Humans lived for roughly 80 standard years. They bred like crazy. They were natural bureaucrats with an instinct for organization that made other species vaguely uncomfortable. And they were so unremarkable that nobody ever suspected them of anything more dangerous than filing paperwork efficiently. For 30 years, Ace Mercer had been placing humans throughout the galactic government, not to steal secrets or sabotage systems, but to wait, to blend in, to become part of the infrastructure that nobody ever noticed until it stopped working. And then, with a single speech, he'd activated all of them at once. Kaiko's analysis suggested the trigger had been embedded in the words themselves, some kind of linguistic pattern that his network had been programmed to recognize. The moment he'd finished speaking, automated systems across the galaxy had begun executing protocols that had been dormant for decades. They weren't destroying anything. They weren't crashing fleets or erasing databases. They were simply making it impossible to hide the truth. Every classified document, every secret meeting, every backroom deal and cover-up and convenient lie that kept the council functioning, all of it was being released in perfect chronological order, complete with timestamps and authentication codes. It was, Kaiko realized, the most elegant act of warfare she'd ever witnessed. The humans hadn't attacked the council's power structure. They'd simply held up a mirror and let it destroy itself. The final piece of the puzzle came when she traced the funding for Meridian Solutions. The credits had come from a foundation called the Long Peace Initiative, which had been established in the early days of human galactic contact by someone named Dr. Elizabeth Roberts. Dr. Roberts' manifesto, buried in the Foundation archives, was remarkably straightforward.
If humanity is to survive contact with galactic civilization, we must ensure that power remains accountable to truth. This organization exists to plant seeds that will bloom only if the powerful forget that they serve the powerless.
30 years of patience, hundreds of careers carefully guided, thousands of perfectly ordinary humans living perfectly ordinary lives until the moment they were needed. And now the galaxy was burning with the light of its own secrets. By the 7th day, the situation had devolved into something that might charitably be called complete governmental collapse. 3 species had recalled their ambassadors and were threatening to leave the council entirely. The Faraxi had declared martial law on their homeworld. The Aelari were experiencing what their psychiatrists were calling collective psionic trauma from having their deepest shames broadcast across 17 systems. In desperation, the surviving leadership made a series of increasingly frantic offers to Ace Mercer. Command of the remaining loyal fleets, the position of Supreme Counselor, complete amnesty for Earth and all human colonies, a formal apology and monetary compensation equivalent to the GDP of a small moon. His response to each offer was the same. He turned a page in his book and continued reading. Finally, they tried the only option left: assassination. The Shadowkin were older than most civilizations, beings that existed in the spaces between realities where light bent strangely and time flowed like honey. They were assassins by nature, not by choice. Their entire species had evolved to hunt in dimensions that other beings couldn't perceive, couldn't defend against, couldn't even properly conceptualize. Kessara had been killing for 3 centuries, and in all that time, she'd never failed to eliminate a target. She moved through dimensions that had no names, struck from angles that didn't exist in normal space, and left no evidence except the absence of whoever had been marked for death. The Council's offer was simple: kill Ace Mercer, restore order, save the galaxy from the chaos his silence was causing. She accepted because she was curious. In 300 years of existence, no one had ever detected her approach. No one had ever known her name without being told. And yet, 15 years ago, a human interrogator had looked at her across a table and spoken her true name as if they were old friends. The Drakmore incident. She'd been hired to eliminate a shipping magnate who was supposedly embezzling from refugee relief funds. Standard work: find the target, confirm the accusations, eliminate the problem. But her employer had suggested she verify the intelligence first, just to be thorough. So she'd gone to the best interrogator money could buy. A human who worked for anyone with enough credits and the right connections. Someone who could extract truth from beings who'd forgotten what honesty meant. Ace Mercer had taken one look at the evidence against her target and smiled that same knowing smile he wore now. Your employer wants him dead because he's not embezzling, he'd told her. He's been using his own money to actually help the refugees. Someone with connections to the relief fund wants him eliminated so they can install a more cooperative replacement. She'd left without killing anyone. It had been the first time in her existence that she'd walked away from a contract, not because she couldn't complete it, but because she'd chosen not to. The distinction had haunted her for 15 years. Now, sliding through dimensional gaps that would drive most beings insane, she wondered if this was what the human had intended all along. If, somehow, impossibly, he'd been playing a game that stretched across decades, moving pieces she couldn't see toward an endgame she couldn't imagine. She materialized in his cell at 0347 local time, armed with weapons that could unmake someone from reality itself. Blades that cut through the quantum foam of existence. Poisons that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. Tools designed to kill gods, if gods were foolish enough to take physical form. Ace Mercer was sitting at his desk, reading. He looked up as she appeared, and his smile was exactly as she remembered it. Knowing, patient, completely unafraid. "Hello, Ace." The sound of her own voice made her freeze, not from fear. She'd transcended such crude emotions centuries ago, but from something deeper, more fundamental. Recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. The sound was too loud in the small room, though she'd whispered it as if announcing her presence was already giving too much away. And it was. She'd planned to make it quick, clean, professional. But now, standing in the presence of the only being who'd ever made her question her purpose, she found herself hesitating.
"You knew I would come,"
she said, her voice carrying harmonics that existed in frequencies normal space couldn't contain. Ace closed his book, On the Nature of Choice, and gave her his complete attention. He didn't speak, but somehow his silence felt like an answer.
"The Council thinks you're the threat,"
she continued, her form flickering between dimensions as emotions she'd thought long dead began to surface.
"They think killing you will stop the chaos, since you won't speak, and bad things happen when they try to get you to speak."
His gray eyes held hers with terrifying gentleness. Still no words.
"But you're not the threat, are you? You're just..."
She paused, searching for words that could not contain the impossible truth she was beginning to understand.
"You're just showing them what they already were."
Ace's smile widened fractionally. It was the closest thing to agreement she was going to get. Kessara felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 centuries. Uncertainty. Not about her abilities. She could kill him in a dozen ways before he could think, but about whether she should.
"The Drakmore incident,"
she said, her voice barely above a whisper.
"You knew what that would do to me. What it would make me question."
Ace tilted his head slightly, and somehow that small gesture contained more communication than most beings managed with entire speeches.
"You've been planning this for 15 years,
she realized.
Not just the network, not just the leaks. This moment, this conversation. You knew they would send me."
His silence was confirmation enough.
"Why?"
The question tore itself from her throat like a physical thing.
"Why make me question who I am? Why show me that I could choose differently?"
For the first time since she'd known him, Ace's expression changed. The knowing smile became something softer, sadder. He reached across the table and placed a single finger on the cover of his book, On the Nature of Choice. Kessara stared at the title, and understanding hit her like a dimensional collapse. He hadn't been trying to recruit her or manipulate her or use her as a weapon. He'd simply been offering her something her species never possessed, the knowledge that she could be more than what she was created to be.
"You're not going to say anything, are you?"
she asked.
"Not one word to defend yourself, or explain your plan, or try to convince me not to kill you?"
Ace's smile returned, gentle and patient and completely unafraid.
"Because the choice has to be mine,"
she whispered.
"Really mine, not influenced by argument or persuasion or fear. Just mine."
She stood there for 17 minutes, existing in all dimensions simultaneously, weapons ready, target acquired. The most dangerous assassin in the galaxy, faced with the simplest possible choice: kill or walk away. In the end, she chose to walk away. She pocketed Ace's book On the Nature of Choice on the way out. Not because she couldn't kill him, not because she was afraid of consequences or reprisals or failure, but because for the first time in 300 years of existence, she wanted to see what would happen if she chose mercy over murder. As she began to fade back into the spaces between realities, she heard something that made her pause. Not a sound. Ace hadn't spoken, but somehow, impossibly, She felt his gratitude. Quiet, profound, completely without expectation or demand. "I won't forget this," she said to the empty air. Ace's smile was the last thing she saw before the dimensional barriers closed between them. The next morning, Counselor Thiara found a detailed recording of her conversation with Kasara playing on every screen in the station. Not the assassination attempt, just the psychological autopsy of a being who'd spent 3 centuries convincing herself that murder was justice.
How?
Thiara demanded when she stormed into Ace's cell.
How are you doing this?
Ace looked up from his new book, Understanding Motivation, a practical guide, and gave her the same patient smile he'd given everyone else. By the 10th day, Kaiko was the only council investigator still functioning. Everyone else had either fled, suffered nervous breakdowns, or discovered truths about themselves that made continuing impossible. She walked into Ace's cell without ceremony. No guards, no weapons, no recording devices, just a Telnari crystal being and a human who'd brought down the galaxy's most powerful government by doing absolutely nothing.
"I know you didn't leak the secrets,"
she said without preamble.
"I know you didn't build the network. You just waited 30 years for the right moment to say the right words."
Ace set down his book, The Ethics of Truth, When Honesty Becomes Violence, and regarded her with approval.
"So, tell me,"
Kaiko continued, her crystalline structure shifting through colors that indicated both respect and wariness.
"why spend 3 decades preparing to destroy the most stable government the galaxy has ever known?"
Ace was quiet. Of course he was. Kaiko looked around the room as if in search of answers. Her eyes rested on his book, specifically the words ethics and honesty.
"Because stability built on lies isn't stability at all. It's just a delay."
Kaiko reached for the right words, trying to see if she was on the right track based on Ace's reactions. He stood, moving with the grace of someone who understood that every gesture carried meaning.
"The council was always going to collapse. Power structures that depend on secrets always do. You simply ensured that when it happened, someone would remember why."
Kaiko looked at Ace's eyes. She saw herself reflected in them. She saw her own determined expression reflected back.
"And that someone is me."
Ace walked to the window, looking out at a galaxy that was busy reinventing itself in the wake of enforced honesty. Kaiko found herself suddenly exhausted and sat in Ace's chair now that he was by the window.
"Now that people know what their leaders really are, what their governments actually do, what their own species is capable of when they think no one is watching,"
Kaiko said.
"the question is what they choose to do with that knowledge."
Kaiko regarded Ace, weary of him but at the same time tolerant.
"I suppose we have to thank you for this knowledge that allows us choice, even if it comes in the form of chaos and agony."
Kaiko sighed again.
"Perhaps there's no other way for such change to begin."
He turned back to Kaiko, and for the first time, she saw something almost like sadness in his eyes. Kaiko watched him for a long moment, her thoughts cycling through spectrums of light that painted the walls in complex patterns.
"You're leaving."
It wasn't a question. Kaiko laughed.
"Well, go ahead. It's not like I can stop you. No one, thus far, has been able to."
Kaiko suddenly regarded him with curiosity.
"I wonder what you would have found on me had I tried to crack you. I've never hired you. There's not much I can think of that was atrociously bad, certainly nothing like the others. But perhaps they never thought of their actions as atrocious until it was public."
Ace smiled at Kaiko and tapped his temple. Kaiko didn't try to stop him. She wasn't even sure she could have if she'd wanted to. Instead, she watched as the most dangerous human in the galaxy walked calmly out of his cell, down the corridor, and into the chaos he'd created. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply disappeared into the crowds of refugees, diplomats, and revolutionaries that filled the station's corridors, becoming just another unremarkable figure in the sea of beings trying to figure out what came next. No one stopped him. No one even seemed to see him. And in the wreckage of the Galactic Council, as 47 species began the long, painful process of rebuilding their governments on something resembling truth, Senior Investigator Kaiko filed the shortest report of her career.
Subject departed voluntarily. Recommend no pursuit. Case closed.
She never saw Ace Mercer again. But sometimes, when the new governments that rose from the ashes of the old began to show signs of the same corruption, the same secrecy, the same comfortable lies that had destroyed their predecessors, classified documents would begin appearing in public databases. Always perfectly timed, always perfectly damaging, always signed with the same simple message. Reflection requires light. M. And somewhere in the galaxy, beings would remember that humans weren't monsters. They were just and reflective. And reflections, as any child knows, show you exactly what you are, whether you want to see it or not.